Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest in the series of webinars, the INFUSE webinars, hosted by Send. This month, we're going to be talking about maturity models in insurance underwriting. We've had a number of really interesting sessions over the last few months, and I don't think this is going to be any less interesting. Maturity models is something I've found absolutely fascinating over the years and really, really valuable as a tool for insurance companies to understand where they're at and where they could be. So today we're specifically looking at it in terms of insurance underwriting, and I've got a panel of two people to talk us through all of this and explain to us what maturity models are, what they're all about, and what value you can get from them. So I'd like to introduce the panel, and I'm going to start with Will Hartnett. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Will here. I joined Send in March this year. Previously, I was with Axis for 20 years, splitting my time fairly evenly over those 20 years, 10 years London market, lucky enough to live in New York for 10 years. Over the last 5 years, I spent a lot of time looking at digital distribution and then taking some of those digital kind of characteristics and bringing them into more traditional operating models. So it was kind of a lot of that work was a genesis going into this underwriting maturity model. Thanks.
And Will, I think I'm right in saying that you are the architect of the Send maturity model for underwriting.
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. So we've got right to the heart of the question here. You're the man who's produced this framework. Excellent. So our second panel member is Lloyd Peters, who's head of revenue for Send. Welcome, Lloyd.
Hey, Tony. Yeah, good to be here. Lloyd Peters. I'm head of revenue, as Tony said. So my job is really talking to all our prospective clients and trying to make sense of their transformation agenda, the journey that they want to go on, and help them understand how Send can enable and power that. And before joining Send, I was a career consultant for my sins. So I spent 11 years with Deloitte, where I was a director in the digital insurance team. So spent a lot of time working with clients to understand their target capabilities, their transformation agendas, and build a roadmap for change. So underwriting maturity models and other kind of maturity models I've dealt with in the past and definitely find really useful. So happy to be talking about them.
Excellent. Well, we've got a great panel here to go through this, and I know we've got quite a lot of ground to cover in the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to dive straight in, and I'm actually going to start with you, Will, and just ask you a very, very simple and straightforward question. Why is a maturity model important, and what value would an underwriter get from using it?
Yeah. So essentially, I guess what is a maturity model? I mean, it's essentially a blueprint. I mean, laying out across the underwriting life cycle, if you look at the value chain or the risk life cycle, all the various capabilities needed in each step of the process. So nothing new with that. I guess the maturity model went a step further, and it's kind of saying for each of those value stage or value chain component parts, let's look at the evolution of the capabilities. Let's see how that capability matures over the life as you move from a process-centric operating model to more of a data-centric operating model. And that's a kind of a powerful visual for users. Now, how is that helpful to underwriters and platform stakeholders? I mean, today, they're just bombarded with the latest and greatest of capabilities, in terms of, any direction that they may go. And that's quite an overwhelming experience to have in the context of finite resources, in the context of, picking the right capabilities to move the needle for the business. So essentially, the maturity model allows them to take a deep breath. It allows them to kind of take a step back, do a frank assessment of where they are today, assess the capabilities as they hit against those business priorities to say, are these the right capabilities to enable us to achieve what we need to achieve? I think I kind of dropped it in there. What's key is to have an understanding of what those business priorities are, like what are those business strategies and how they are fully kind of defined and intertwined, because understanding those business strategies allow them to look at what capabilities they need to prioritize and where they need to mature them. Just one thing to kind of point out, I guess, with the model, it's not one size fits all. In terms of it depends on the market you operate in, depends on the complexity of risk. There'll be different ceilings to the maturity of that capability. So it's understanding what's meaningful for your business and with finite resources where you can invest and move the needle, as I said there. So hopefully that lays it out a little bit.
And in terms of the value, that's really very much around, so they've baselined where they are. They can see where the potential is to head, and I guess a lot of the value is the difference between the two and how they're going to shape the strategy to get there. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I guess understanding what that strategy is, understanding that across the value chain,
because you give different strategies for different organizations. I guess that's
you've different strategies, different organizations, but having an underwriting strategy that's tied to an operations strategy, that's tied to an app dev strategy, that's tied to a data strategy, being able to see the full value chain on the one page, understanding what's meaningful from an underwriting perspective and how that cascades into those other functional groups, allows every party at the table to see, okay, we see the front end is of critical importance. We see, the mid-tier of risk assessment is critically important, and how that plays into our portfolio management strategy. So it's a holistic view that allows all stakeholders see where they are today, understand the business priorities, map where they want to get to, and then see a kind of a path to that. It's a very, I guess the holistic nature of it is kind of the important part. Previously, everyone operated in kind of a siloed kind of operating state. Yeah.
Yeah, let's be honest, most insurance companies do that. They operate in silos. A holistic approach is important.
Tony, maybe if I jump in there, there's maybe if I build on that, it's almost thinking about what questions might people be asking and how might the underwriting maturity model help them answer them. So you might have one saying, do we need to change? We're hearing negative feedback from underwriters. We're hearing the frustrations, but frustrations and niggles from systems are always going to be there, even if your systems are actually really good. So how do you cut through some of that noise? So as Will said, that ability to kind of take a breath and actually help frame an assessment can guide you as to whether there is a need for change. Are you really lagging behind target maturity models, or is actually it's just BAU disgruntled people? So that that's one thing that you can use it for. There's another where maybe you're already convinced because you've used the model or not that you do need to change. You're convinced about that, but change to what? So what is the target state? How do I frame that? Because as Will said, there's a plethora of perception, of view, of gimmicks, of stories in the market, of things people have done well or not well. How do you build a logical, sensible, achievable plan of action and where you want to be? So I think the model can help you understand where you want to get to. And then the last one is, how do I get there? It's a maturity model that kind of implies evolution, which implies time, it implies a journey. And I think helping build that roadmap is definitely something the model can help you with.
Okay, so if this, as you said, examines and explains where the underwriter function is heading, how do people use this framework in order to plan out their strategy and their implementation program?
Yes, I think there's two ways I thought about answering that one. There's I guess the practical and the where you are in your stage. So at the very highest level, it can be for ideation, garner some excitement, get people thinking, right? People who don't think about this at all, they're not aware of the art of the possible. So it can definitely be a tool to help conversations start around underwriting, even if it's very, very early on. And even if people aren't really in the habit of talking kind of business transformation, then this is a nice, easy, digestible way of thinking about it. So I think ideation is definitely one of them. If you move further forward, I think business case development is always a challenge. I think people lean towards kind of FTE savings on a business case development basis because it's tangible. You can sort of say X hours, X FTE, X salary, but I think that often undersells the value. It certainly undersells the value of improving your underwriting operations, where you can start to do more with less and increment your risk selection and improve your loss ratio. So I think this helps you frame where the value sits and how that value can compound and grow like through the evolution. So I think business case development is definitely something it can support with. We talked about target state. So I think that's true from a vision perspective, but what are the what are the component parts? What's the backlog of change? What's the features? What's the capabilities? What architecture do you need? I think this can help with that as well. So it can really give you a view of, right, well, if this is the maturity level I need to get to, then what functional capabilities do I need to underpin that? And I can build out a backlog of change that I can go and then do a procurement process. I can do a buy versus build comparison. I can go about thinking about how I'm going to get there. And then that roadmap item that I talked about earlier is, I think, really critical to this as well. Some of these things have dependencies on others, and some of them you can't just jump to, particularly some of the higher higher levels of the maturity model and the augmented and the smart. It's where everyone wants to be. But there are some foundational components of good underwriting operational practice that you need to take care of first and foremost, I think. So yeah, so no worries. Yeah, those are some of the I guess what you can do with it.
In my experience, a lot of the time when people look at projects in this area, they look at the efficiency plays, as you said, cost reduction, do more with less, etc. And actually, the savings that you make from doing that are, to be honest with you, in reality, very limited compared to the opportunities that are out there to be more effective as opposed to more efficient, to write better business, to reduce your claims ratio, to think more about portfolio management and all the other things about quality of risks. So what you're saying, I really like. Will, that leads me to ask, if you're then trying to measure that via this maturity model, what are the key characteristics that the maturity model is going to be looking at in order to facilitate all of this?
Yeah, and you kind of touched on a few of them there, and I think with all these models, model's fine, but what is it there to do? It's there essentially to help with business priorities and underwriting priorities and challenges. So if we look at kind of what are the key ones that are out there today, customer service, customer centricity, broker SLAs, they're not going down. Quotes per underwriter. There's not more investment dollars to bring on more underwriters. Underwriters have to do more quotes. So that's, you could say, is an efficiency play. But then if you also look at the risks that they're underwriting, consistency in risk selection, and how, you talked there about efficiency, and then you brought in more of the insight side of things. And I think that's a fundamental component of moving from a process-centric operating model to a data-centric operating model. Because if we think about process is more about efficiency and teasing out cost and trying to get the SLAs into a good spot. But when we say a data-centric operating model, we are really looking at how we can harness the data that sits around the either first, second, third-party data that sits around the risk that helps you with that consistency in risk selection. But it's not just the risk selection, is those deeper risk insights allow more accurate pricing. Those deeper risk insights play into a finer grain view on portfolio management. So that these are all business problems or business opportunities. Now, if you look at it from a maturity model perspective and you look at the value chain, it's a very, very integrated world. So it's not just underwriting. If we look at, say, submission management, and okay, that's traditionally an ops function. Okay, but that submission management is where it's a fundamental component from an underwriting perspective, and getting quality underwriting data that will feed into the risk assessment play. So, back to the comment on operating in silos, that's operations dealing with underwriting and need to deal with our data and analytics team to understand what data is meaningful at the front. So that's what's the underwriting strategy? How does that play into the operation strategy? How does that play into the data and analytics strategy? That's all. And I've just touched on submission management. When, like, say, you look at transactional underwriting, how do those deeper insights enable far richer insights at a portfolio level, that suddenly when a CUO is looking at their underwriting strategy and shaping the portfolio, and they want to make portfolio actions in a near real-time basis, not the traditional a quarter lag when we look at geo and LOB level of portfolio data, but looking at fine grain insights into portfolios where they may want to shape a limit profile or whatever aspect of the risk that they're looking at. and being able to kind of take that information and 360 feed it back into a transactional underwriting environment. I think that's kind of almost the nirvana state where you've got that 360 degree, but that all starts, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, it starts at the submission. Like, it starts at getting access to quality risk data that is trusted, so that operations function and how that is done, be it systematically or humans, it doesn't really matter, but it is all tied together. And if you look at the maturity model, that framework essentially lays out the soup to nuts or start to finish of the value chain and how these are integrated components.
So actually, that touches on a question that we just had come through. And the question was, are you saying that it's a measure of how joined up the underwriting function is with other organizational capabilities, for example, the tech people or the organizational structure? I think you're saying yes. And in fact, it's more than that. It's also the underwriter-broker relationship. So it's the external connections as well. Those things are, you can't improve one without addressing the rest.
100%. But if you look at the broker model, so in an analog world, okay, emails come in, but SLAs on turnaround time of in a US context, broker of record, in a UK context, how fast you can get your quote turnaround times. I mean, these SLAs, essentially the brokers are now looking at the carriers and almost grading them, not only by their SLAs, but understanding their appetite and understanding, through the data that the brokers are harvesting. So even staying pace with the brokers, I think this is changing the paradigm somewhat, in terms of those strategies, coming back to strategy, but that underwriting strategy to say, do we understand what we like? What is the data we need to determine those risks, and if they sit with that criteria? And how do we underwrite that risk in a consistent manner, leveraging additional data sets? Like the challenge is confining the data almost, because there's such an abundance, but just giving the right level of data. And that's now moving to more a data-centric operating model.
Yeah, you made a very good point there about the fact that underwriters are thinking about how they're grading the brokers, but they're not thinking about the fact that the brokers on the other side are grading them in the same way. So it's about your performance and looking after your customer, because essentially brokers
100%.
are customers,
Yep.
and you've got to look after your customers in the same way. So yeah, that's all rolling up into a similar kind of discussion, isn't it, about how all of this ties together, and you can't just look at it in isolation. I think that's a really important learning for underwriters to think about. They know that they're reliant on people within their organization, but they're not masters of their own destiny in this. So any thoughts then about, when you're looking at these key characteristics and the fact that everything's joined together, about how that can influence the strategy as you're thinking your way forward on all of this? Yes, you've got to get them involved, but what, for an underwriter who wants to do something in this area, what should they be thinking about then?
Well, I think Lloyd made a great kind of point in terms of the use of the tool, and a simple thing is of getting them thinking. I mean, it sounds like a simple statement, but if you're sitting down with a maturity model and you're kind of saying, do you realize these other aspects around, like it's down on a page to say, if you want to get to the next level of underwriting, and the pressure is there. That's why when I said earlier, they're just being bombarded with, capability and I guess management driving kind of an agenda, and they're like overwhelmed. So being able to see, well, if I need to move to the next level of underwriting, I actually have to work with, peers in the group and understand better, from an operations perspective, how can I get more data into that pipe? From a data perspective, how can I make sure that's at a trusted data set? How can I augment that or use that in kind of models like prioritization models, or anything that drives levels of efficiency or improves insights from a risk selection perspective? And then how that feeds into a more exotic is a strong word, but a richer pricing approach that accounts for these kind of subcomponents of risk. So I think it allows the underwriter, when they are feeling in that overwhelmed state, to look at the big picture, take a step back, assess where they're at, assess where they need to get to, and who are those other stakeholders that they need to play with.
Right. Okay. I think that's a really, really important learning. So, Lloyd, you talked about the fact that you've been a consultant in this industry previously, and you've seen lots of different organisations working. You've obviously got your experience in the time that you've been with Send. What do you think is the typical maturity level today, And are there differences across lines of business, classes of business, geographies? In fact, I think we've had a question similar to that come up in the chat. Are you making the assumption that all underwriters and classes should follow the same progression along the path? So do they start in the same place? Do they end in the same place? And are they also going through the same journey?
Yeah, always good to field a question from Mr. Emmerich. So when I answer the second one first and the first one second, actually. So it's a bit of a yes and no on the, are we assuming that they should all follow the same path? I think directionally, yes. At the highest level, this is a maturity model market-wise that people should be feeling their way through and building towards. Now, there's some caveats to that. Vary on the company size, so how dynamic and how isolated are you going to be versus scale, because scale is really important here. If you're trying to move a scale organization or even a medium-sized scale organization to a high level of maturity without losing consistency, without losing transparency of your operations, without losing control, then you need to build those foundational rigors and build it up that way. If you're talking about something very small, very isolated, very nimble, then I think you can move much, much quicker up through the maturity model spectrum. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to start in a manual underwriting model, in a very traditional model, and then go to a heavy kind of process workflow document centric model on a system, and then go through. So you don't have to go through the stages in practice.
Okay, so you don't have to have a logical step by step up from 0 to 1 to 3, 2, 3, 4. You can move from 0 to 3.
You can if you've got the right context, but I still think the fundamental principles, the foundational components of what one represents, i.e. control of your data, single view of data, solid documentation storage, good controls. So I think those things are foundational pillars that need to be built upon to then allow you to add data connectivity, which in turn allows you to then generate insights and generate recommendations, which in turn gives you the confidence to be able to allow those insights, recommendations to drive automatic decisions. So you don't necessarily need to physically go through each step 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. If you have the setup to be able to move quicker, that's fine. But I still think there's some fundamental operational principles that need to be built up through the layers. Hopefully that answered the question. And in terms of the first question, where are people today? Obviously, as you'd expect, it's hugely varied. And the point of the maturity model as well is you might be a 3 in some areas and a 1 in others and a 0 in others. So it's not a one size fits all or one number for the whole company. And it might be different across different lines, and it often is. But I would say it varies from 0 to 3. Even some of the famous smart, the smart underwriting, I'd argue mostly still in 3 rather than the true 4 as we see smart underwriting. But the median is probably 0 or maybe low 1s. Variation differences. Yeah, there's definitely different variations across territories. I think from a pure underwriting perspective on a maturity model as we've got it here, I think what we see in the London market in particular is it's really kind of a lot of 0 and 2s. So big chunks of the underwriting estate are still quite manual, but yet there's a lot of augmentation, a lot of data richness, but in pockets. So isolated, injected insights from data providers, from internal solutions, internal tools.
So do you see that as a peculiarity of the Lloyd's and London market in terms of the fact they've got a bureau to work with and interact, just the foibles of the market, or is it something in the way that they operate?
I think it's a byproduct of how the markets progress. So the relationship nature, the in-person nature, the complexity. And I think all of that's combined to historically not wanting to constrain underwriters with workflow or policies or procedures that's going to prevent them from having the flexibility and the dynamism to underwrite for the best interests of their clients. And therefore, it's led to a slightly more manual underwriting landscape. But obviously, as data's come in, people want to use that. So they've got good spot solutions and injections of insight. So there's some connected and augmented elements there. But I would say generally they're not woven into an overarching modern digital underwriting estate. And that's where scale starts to become a problem, because if you've got marine doing that and using that tool, and you've got property capturing their data and viewing their underwriting in a different lens over here, then you start to see cost of ownership across different lines, a lack of ability to standardize control metrics, operational MI. So that's where the scale starts to become a problem, which is why building up a consistent view of your digital underwriting and then layering in connected data, layering in augmentation, which can be varied by line, starts to become really important.
Okay. So, obviously Send is an accelerator in this process, and you're able to help organizations. One thing I don't know that you did actually answer is, do you see a difference between geographies? You talked about the London market versus Europe.
I think the bigger difference I see is probably London market and US. I think in the US, I think there's probably a more broad use of the big policy admin systems for some pre-bind workflow.
Right.
So they've got, I think, a bit more of the digital underwriting covered by bringing some of the policy admin solutions back. So they might be slightly more advanced in that sense in the underwriting landscape. But then I think that creates problems for the flexibility of data pipelines, connectivity, and insight. So they may be slightly further ahead now, but there may be some challenges as they try and progress up through that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Understand. Okay. Interesting perspective. So look, we've only got a couple of minutes left. But before we go, I always like to ask this question when we're doing a webinar like this, and we've got an awful lot of things coming up and things for people to think about, to try and distill this down into a couple of things which people can really take away and use on a day-to-day basis. So, if you met somebody who was listening to this webinar in a couple of weeks' time, and they said they'd seen you and they loved the webinar, and you said to them, so what's the one big thing you remember from this webinar? What would you want it to be? Will, maybe if I could start with you, what's the big takeaway for you in all of this?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a broken record or not, but maybe that's a good thing. For me to move from a process or manual driven kind of world to a more data centric operating environment, it takes a village. It takes a village. Clear strategies with tight early engagement across all the business functions is key. So I'll leave it as that in the snappy enough kind of roundup. Okay,
thank you. And Lloyd, last word with you.
I've got a really cheesy slogan. It sounds like some sort of government policy, or I should be on a rostrum or something, but it really captures how I think about this, which is think big, start small, act fast. I didn't invent that, but it really resonated with me. So that's what I think this model can help you with as well, right? We want to have ambition. There's loads of latent value in the market out there, and there's some really, really good stuff that we can do. So think big, be ambitious, but don't cripple yourself by trying to go straight there or jump to level 3, jump to level 4, do it all at once, because it'll be really tough to do that, particularly if you're already managing a business. And act fast. I mean, take the first step, get going, because it's a hot space. Everyone's looking to invest in this space. So I think it's something that people need to get started on.
Excellent. Well, look, if nothing else, using this framework as a means to benchmark where people are right now, I think is not a bad first step. And one thing I do know about this industry is there's a huge amount of FOMO goes on. Everybody wants to know what everybody else is doing. And, you're ideally placed to be able to look at that and advise them on where they are and how they're measuring up against their competitors. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for that. It's been a really good session, a lot of really valuable insights there. It's just really the only thing we've got left to do really is to remind everybody, if they want to, they can download the framework document from the Send website and begin the exercise of benchmarking your underwriting function today. That's something that everybody who's on the webinar can do. And also to remind everybody that to register for the next month's webinar, which is coming up on the 14th of August. The next month, we're going to be talking about emerging risks and what's coming up next for the industry. Just really remains for me to say thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. And I think you've covered this subject really well. Thanks very much indeed.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. That was brilliant.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.